In a quiet little town called Oak Ridge, life moved at its own pace. People knew each other by name, and the streets were lined with trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was the kind of place where everyone felt safe, except for one young boy who carried a secret he didn't share with anyone. This boy lived an ordinary life on the surface. He went to school, played basketball during recess, and helped his mom around the house after classes. But what made him different wasn't something you could see right away. His story started years ago, when his family attended a charity event in their town. That day, they met someone truly extraordinary, a man whose name was known all over the world, Chuck Norris. Now, if you've ever heard of Chuck Norris, you probably know he's not just any celebrity. Sure, he starred in action movies and became famous for his tough guy roles, but there was more to him than that. He was also a martial arts legend, known for his discipline, strength, and kindness. The boy's family had no idea how much meeting Chuck Norris would change their lives forever. It happened almost by chance. At the charity event, the boy wandered off while his parents chatted with friends. He found himself near a booth showcasing karate techniques. A crowd had gathered, watching as Chuck Norris demonstrated some incredible moves. The boy stood there, mesmerized. When Norris noticed him standing quietly at the edge of the group, he smiled and asked, "Hey kid, do you like martial arts?" The boy nodded shyly. Norris knelt down to his level and said, "You know, learning karate isn't just about fighting. It's about becoming stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too." Those words stuck with the boy, long after the event ended. A few weeks later, the family received an unexpected invitation from Chuck Norris himself. He wanted to teach the boy karate. Of course, the boy's parents were surprised and a little nervous, but they agreed. After all, how often does someone get the chance to learn from a real-life hero? So began the boy's journey into the world of martial arts. Every summer, he traveled to Chuck Norris's ranch in Texas. There, under the blazing sun, he trained harder than he ever thought possible. Norris pushed him to his limits, teaching him not only punches and kicks, but also lessons about patience, respect, and self-control. "Remember," Norris would say, "a true martial artist doesn't use his skills to hurt others. He uses them to protect and inspire." The boy soaked up every word. By the time he turned 12, he had mastered techniques that most adults could only dream of. Yet, despite his impressive abilities, he never showed off or bragged about what he could do. Back in Oak Ridge, he kept his training a secret. To his classmates, he was just another kid trying to fit in. But fitting in wasn't always easy. The boy was different, not because of his karate skills, but because of the color of his skin. Some kids teased him for it, calling him names and making rude comments. For a while, he ignored them, hoping they'd grow tired of picking on him. But then, things took a darker turn. One afternoon, as the boy walked home from school, 3 older boys blocked his path. They weren't exactly strangers. They were troublemakers who liked to intimidate younger students. One of them stepped forward and demanded, "Give us your lunch money, or else." The boy froze. He didn't feel scared. He'd faced tougher challenges during his training, but he didn't want to cause a scene either. Instead of arguing, he handed over the few dollars he had and walked away. As he trudged home, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't be the last time they came after him. That night, he sat alone in his room, thinking about what had happened. Should he tell his mom? Or maybe report the bullies to the principal? Part of him wanted to handle it on his own, using the skills Chuck Norris had taught him. But another part reminded him of Norris's advice. Violence should always be a last resort. Still, the boy couldn't deny the frustration bubbling inside him. Why did these bullies think they could push him around? And why did they expect him to simply give in without a fight? He clenched his fists, imagining how it would feel to stand up to them, not with anger but with confidence. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the boy made a decision. If the bullies came back, he wouldn't run away. He'd face them head on, not to hurt them, but to show them that he wasn't someone to mess with. With that thought in mind, he drifted off to sleep, ready to take on whatever tomorrow might bring. The next morning, the boy woke up with a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He felt nervous but also strangely determined. The thought of facing those bullies again wasn't easy, but he reminded himself of what Chuck Norris always said. Fear is natural, but courage is choosing to move forward anyway. That line played over and over in his mind as he got ready for school. When he walked into class, he tried to act normal. He didn't want anyone to suspect that something was bothering him. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that today might be different. Every time he heard loud footsteps in the hallway or saw a group of older kids huddled together, his heart skipped a beat. Was it them? Were they planning something? By lunchtime, nothing had happened yet, but the tension was building. As he sat alone under a tree eating his sandwich, one of the boys from yesterday appeared nearby. This kid wasn't part of the trio that had confronted him, but he was friends with them. The boy noticed him glance his way and whisper something to another student before walking off. It was clear they were watching him. After school, the boy decided to take a longer route home, hoping to avoid trouble. He cut through the park where tall trees shaded the winding paths. For a moment, he thought he'd made it safely. But then, just as he reached the basketball court, he heard voices behind him. "There he is," one of them said. The boy turned around slowly. Sure enough, it was the same three troublemakers who had demanded money from him the day before. They stood there with smirks on their faces, blocking his way. The tallest one stepped forward, crossing his arms. "You've got till tomorrow to bring us more money," he said. "And if you don't—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The threat hung heavy in the air. For a split second, the boy considered running. He could probably outrun them, or at least try, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. Running away would only make them come back stronger next time. Instead, he stood still, looking each of them in the eye. His voice came out steady, even though his hands were clenched tightly by his sides. "I'm not giving you any more money," he said firmly. The bullies looked surprised. Clearly, they hadn't expected him to stand up to them like that. One of them laughed nervously while another muttered, "What did you say?" "I said no," the boy repeated. "I'm not afraid of you." This caught them off guard. They exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. The leader narrowed his eyes and took a step closer. "You think you're tough, huh?" he sneered. "Let's see how tough you really are." At this point, the boy's heart was racing. He knew he could defend himself if he had to, but he didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily. Still, he couldn't back down now, not when they were pushing him so hard. So instead of answering, he focused on staying calm. He remembered what Chuck Norris had taught him about breathing deeply and keeping his composure even in tense situations. "You don't want to do this," the boy said quietly. "It's not worth it." But the leader wasn't listening. He grabbed the boy's arm roughly, pulling him closer. "Oh, we'll see about that," he growled. That's when everything changed. The boy reacted instinctively, using the techniques he'd practiced countless times during his summers with Chuck Norris. In one smooth motion, he twisted his body, freeing himself from the grip. Then, without hesitation, he stepped back and raised his hands in a defensive stance. His movements were quick and precise, showing years of discipline and training. The bullies stared at him wide-eyed. None of them had expected this. To them, he was just a quiet kid who kept to himself. They never imagined he'd know how to fight back, let alone with such skill. "I don't want to hurt you," the boy said calmly. "Just leave me alone, okay?" For a moment, nobody moved. The park was eerily silent except for the rustling leaves overhead. Finally, the leader let out a frustrated sigh and backed away. "Fine," he muttered. "Whatever. Let's go." Without another word, the three of them turned and walked off, leaving the boy standing alone on the basketball court. He watched them disappear down the path, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. He hadn't thrown a single punch, but he'd managed to stop them without resorting to violence. As he continued home, he replayed the scene in his head. He felt proud of himself, not because he'd intimidated the bullies, but because he'd stayed true to what Chuck Norris had taught him. Martial arts weren't about aggression. They were about finding balance and resolving conflict peacefully. When he got home, his mom noticed something was different. She asked if everything was okay, and after hesitating for a moment, he told her what had happened. At first, she was worried, but when he explained how he'd handled the situation, she smiled. "I'm so proud of you," she said, pulling him into a hug. "You stood up for yourself the right way." Later that evening, as the boy sat on his bed reflecting on the day, he realized something important. Standing up to those bullies wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about setting an example. Maybe, just maybe, they'd think twice before picking on someone else in the future. And if they didn't, well, he'd be ready. That night, as he drifted off to sleep, he thought about all the lessons Chuck Norris had shared with him. Discipline, respect, courage. These weren't just words. They were tools he could use to face whatever challenges came his way. Little did he know this was only the beginning of his journey. The next morning, the boy woke up feeling a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt proud of how he'd handled himself the day before. He hadn't let fear take over, and he'd stood his ground without resorting to violence. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't really over. Those three troublemakers might have backed off for now, but they weren't the type to let things go easily. As he got ready for school, he replayed the scene in his mind. He remembered how shocked they looked when he freed himself from their leader's grip and held his ground. It was almost funny in a way. They clearly didn't expect him to know how to defend himself. But what would happen if they decided to come back? Would they try to gang up on him again? Or worse, would they spread rumors around school to make him look bad? He shook his head, trying to push those thoughts aside. "One thing at a time," he muttered under his breath. That was another lesson Chuck Norris had drilled into him. Focus on the present moment, not on what might happen later. Still, it was hard not to feel anxious as he walked to school. When he arrived, everything seemed normal at first. Kids were chatting in the hallways, laughing and rushing to class like any other day. But as he made his way to his locker, he noticed something different. People were whispering and glancing his way. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but then he overheard a snippet of conversation. "Did you hear about what happened?" one kid said to another. "No, what?" the other replied. "That quiet kid, you know, the one who always keeps to himself. I heard he stood up to those bullies yesterday. Apparently they tried to mess with him, and he flipped the script on them." The boy froze, his hand halfway to his locker. So word had gotten out already. He wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or worried. On one hand, maybe hearing about what happened would stop others from picking on him. On the other hand, attention wasn't something he wanted right now. He preferred staying under the radar, blending in with everyone else. By lunchtime, the whispers had turned into outright stares. Some kids looked at him with admiration, while others seemed skeptical, like they didn't quite believe the story. A few even approached him to ask if it was true. "Is it really true you stood up to those guys?" one of them asked. The boy nodded, keeping his answers short and simple. He didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but not everyone reacted positively. Later that afternoon, as he was heading to the library to finish some homework, he ran into the leader of the trio. This time the boy was alone, no friends backing him up. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, glaring at the boy as he passed by. "You think you're smart, huh?" The older kid growled. "Just wait. You haven't seen the last of us." The boy stopped walking and turned to face him. His heart was pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I don't want any trouble," he said evenly. "All I did was stand up for myself. If you leave me alone, we won't have a problem." The older kid scowled but didn't say anything else. After a tense moment, he pushed off the wall and walked away. The boy watched him go, his stomach churning. He knew this wasn't over. Not yet. That night, as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything that had happened. Standing up to the bullies had been hard, but it was also empowering. For the first time, he realized just how much strength he'd gained from all those summers training with Chuck Norris. It wasn't just about physical skills. It was about mental toughness, too. Norris had taught him how to stay focused, control his emotions, and think clearly even in stressful situations. Still, the boy couldn't help wondering if there was more he could do. Was standing up to the bullies enough? Or should he try to Find a way to make peace with them? He knew Norris would say forgiveness was important, but forgiving someone wasn't the same as letting them walk all over you. There had to be a middle ground, a way to resolve things without causing more conflict. The next day, the boy decided to take action. Instead of waiting for the bullies to come after him again, he went looking for them. He found them hanging, out near the basketball court during recess, laughing and joking like nothing had happened. When they saw him approaching, their laughter died down, and they exchanged uneasy glances. "What do you want?" the leader snapped, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I came here to talk," the boy said, stopping a few feet away. "Not to fight." The bullies looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Finally, the leader shrugged. "Fine. Talk." The boy took a deep breath. "Look, I don't hate you guys," he began, "and I don't want to keep fighting either. All I want is for you to leave me alone. I'm not giving you money, and I'm not going to let you push me around anymore. Can we agree on that?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the other boys muttered, "Yeah, whatever. Just don't come near us again." The leader hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, we'll leave you alone." The boy felt a wave of relief wash over him. He hadn't expected them to apologize or suddenly become friends, but this was good enough. For now, anyway. As he walked away, he realized something important. Standing up for yourself wasn't just about defending your space. It was about setting boundaries and sticking to them, even when it was hard. Later that evening, as he sat in his room practicing some of the karate moves Norris had taught him, he smiled to himself. He knew he still had a lot to learn, not just about martial arts, but about life. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew he'd face them with courage and determination. The next few days passed in a blur for the boy. At first, he was on edge, constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting the bullies to come back and try something new. But as time went on, it became clear that they were keeping their distance. Whether it was because of the talk he'd had with them, or simply because they didn't want to risk another confrontation, he couldn't be sure. What mattered most was that they weren't bothering him anymore. Still, life didn't go back to normal. Not completely. Word about what had happened spread quickly through school, like wildfire catching dry grass. Some kids treated him differently, now. A few looked up to him, whispering behind his back about how brave he was. Others seemed unsure, almost intimidated by him. He could feel their eyes on him during class, in the hallways, even at lunch. It wasn't always comfortable being the center of attention, especially since he preferred staying out of the spotlight. One day after gym class, a younger student approached him hesitantly. The kid couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and he looked nervous as he tugged on the boy's sleeve. "Hey," the little one said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Is it true you stood up to those big kids?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's true." The younger kid's face lit up with admiration. "That's so cool. Do you think you could teach me how to stand up for myself too? Those same kids sometimes pick on me too." For a moment, the boy didn't know what to say. Teaching someone else felt like a huge responsibility, especially when it came to something as serious as self-defense. But then he thought about Chuck Norris and all the lessons he'd received over the years. Norris hadn't just taught him karate. He'd shown him how to use his skills responsibly, to protect others and inspire confidence. Maybe this was his chance to pass that along. "I can't teach you karate," the boy said finally, kneeling down so he was eye level with the younger kid. "But I can tell you some things that might help. First, don't let them scare you. Bullies feed off fear, but if you stay calm and confident, they won't know what to do. And second, if you ever need help, find a teacher or an adult you trust. You don't have to handle it alone." The younger kid nodded eagerly, clearly soaking up every word. "Thanks," he said before running off to join his friends. Watching him go, the boy felt a small spark of pride. For the first time, he realized that standing up to the bullies hadn't just helped him, it had given him the chance to help someone else too. As the weeks went by, the boy started noticing other changes around school. The trio of troublemakers who had once strutted through the halls like they owned the place suddenly seemed quieter. They avoided eye contact with teachers and kept to themselves during recess. Even their usual crowd of followers seemed to shrink. It was as if their power, their ability to intimidate others, had been stripped away. At first, the boy wondered if he should feel guilty about that. After all, he hadn't set out to humiliate them or ruin their reputation. His goal had been simple: to protect himself and make them stop. But then he reminded himself of something Chuck Norris used to say. Sometimes, showing strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about making them see there's a better way. He hoped that's what had happened here. Maybe, just maybe, the bullies would learn from the experience. Maybe they'd realize that picking on others wasn't the answer. That real respect came from treating people kindly, not scaring them into submission. Only time would tell. Despite the positive changes, the boy still struggled with his own feelings. Standing up to the bullies had been empowering, yes, but it had also opened a door he hadn't expected. Now that people knew he could defend himself, they started coming to him with questions and requests. Some wanted advice on dealing with difficult situations. Others asked if he'd teach them basic self-defense moves. While he appreciated their trust, it made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to be seen as some kind of hero or tough guy. He was just a regular kid trying to get through middle school like everyone else. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench outside the school library flipping through a book, a group of older students approached him. They weren't the same ones who had bullied him. They were different kids altogether, but they carried themselves with the same swagger, the same air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Hey," one of them said, leaning casually against the bench. "We heard about what you did. Pretty impressive." The boy closed his book and looked up, unsure of where this was going. "Thanks," he replied cautiously. "So listen," the older student continued, crossing his arms. "There's this kid in our grade who thinks he's tough stuff. Keeps mouthing off, challenging people. We figured maybe you could show him a thing or two." The boy frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You know," the older student said with a shrug. "Just put him in his place. Show him not to mess with us." It took everything the boy had not to roll his eyes. Here it was again. The idea that because he knew martial arts, he was somehow obligated to fight anyone and everyone who posed a threat. That wasn't what Chuck Norris had taught him at all. Martial arts weren't about proving dominance. They were about building character and fostering peace. "No," the boy said firmly, standing up. "I'm not doing that." The older student raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Why not? Afraid?" "No," the boy shot back. "Because it's not right. If you have a problem with someone, talk to them. Work it out. Don't start fights. Unless you absolutely have to." For a moment, the older student stared at him as if trying to decide whether to argue further. Finally, he smirked and shook his head. "Suit yourself," he muttered before walking away with his friends. As the boy watched them leave, he felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration because people still didn't understand what martial arts were really about. Relief because he'd stayed true to himself and to the lessons Norris had instilled in him. Later that evening, as he practiced his forms in the backyard, the boy reflected on everything that had happened. Life had changed in ways he never anticipated. He'd gone from being an ordinary, quiet kid to someone people looked up to or misunderstood. Sometimes he wished he could turn back time and keep his training a secret, but deep down he knew that wouldn't have solved anything. Standing up to the bullies hadn't just been about protecting himself. It had been about finding his voice, his confidence, and his purpose. And while he didn't have all the answers yet, he knew one thing for certain. He wanted to use his skills to help others, to inspire courage and kindness wherever he could. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, the boy smiled to himself. This journey was far from over, but for now, he was exactly where he needed to be. As the weeks turned into months, the boy began to settle into a new rhythm. Things weren't perfect, life rarely was, but they were better than before. The trio of troublemakers who had once made his days miserable seemed to have moved on, though he occasionally caught glimpses of them in the hallways or at recess. They no longer strutted around with the same cocky confidence. Instead, they kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact and sticking close to each other like shadows. It was almost as if they'd been humbled, not just by him, but by the realization that intimidation wasn't a game they could win forever. But while the bullies had faded into the background, the boy's newfound reputation continued to grow. Word spread beyond his grade, reaching even the upper classes and younger students. Some kids looked at him with admiration, whispering excitedly about how he'd stood up to the tough guys. Others treated him with cautious respect, unsure of what to make of this quiet kid who apparently knew martial arts. And then there were those who came to him for help, kids who felt powerless, scared, or unsure of how to deal with their own struggles. At first, the boy didn't know how to handle all the attention. He wasn't used to being seen as a role model or someone others could turn to in tough situations. Part of him wanted to shrink back into obscurity, to go back to being invisible. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of training with Chuck Norris, knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. If people were looking to him for guidance, maybe it was because they needed someone to believe in. One afternoon after school let out, the boy found himself sitting on a bench near the playground. He had planned to spend a few minutes alone, practicing some of the breathing exercises Norris had taught him. But before he could even close his eyes, a small group of younger students approached him. They hovered nervously, glancing at one another as if waiting for someone to speak first. Finally, one of them, a skinny boy with glasses too big for his face, stepped forward. Hi, he said softly. Can we talk to you? The boy nodded, setting aside his thoughts. Sure. What's up? The younger kids exchanged glances again before the boy with glasses spoke up. We heard about what you did with the bullies, and, well, we were wondering if you could teach us how to stand up for ourselves. His words hung in the air for a moment. The boy hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Teaching karate or any kind of self-defense wasn't something he took lightly. It required patience, discipline, and responsibility. Could he really take on that kind of commitment? I can't teach you karate, he said finally, choosing his words carefully. It's not something you learn overnight. But I can teach you some basics, like how to carry yourself with confidence and how to stay calm when things get tough. That's just as important as knowing how to throw a punch. The kids' faces lit up with excitement. Really? One of them asked. You'd do that? Yeah, the boy replied with a small smile. But only if you promise to use what you learn the right way. Strength isn't about hurting people. It's about protecting yourself and helping others. They nodded eagerly, their eyes wide, with determination. From that day on, the boy started meeting with the group after school. At first, it was just a handful of kids, but soon more joined in, drawn by curiosity and the hope of learning something new. Together, they practiced simple movements, how to stand tall, how to breathe deeply, and how to focus their energy. The boy emphasized respect above all else, reminding them that true strength came from kindness and understanding, not aggression. Despite the positive changes, the boy couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a fine line. While most people admired him for stepping up, there were still those who misunderstood his intentions. Some older students teased him, calling him names like the Karate Kid in mocking tones. Others tried to challenge him, hoping to test his skills and prove themselves stronger. Each time, the boy handled it the same way, with calmness and restraint. One day during lunch, two older boys cornered him near the cafeteria. They weren't the same ones who had bullied him before, but they carried themselves with the same swagger, the same sense of entitlement. One of them smirked as he stepped closer. So we heard you're the big hero now, he said, crossing his arms. Think you're better than everyone else, huh? The boy sighed inwardly. He'd been expecting something like this eventually. Keeping his voice steady, he replied, I don't think I'm better than anyone. I'm just trying to help people. Oh, is that so? The older boy sneered. Well, maybe you should show us what you've got. Or are you all talk and no action? For a moment, the boy considered walking away. He didn't owe these guys anything. They were just looking for a fight, plain and simple. But then he remembered something Chuck Norris had told him. Sometimes, showing restraint is the hardest move of all. So instead of backing down or lashing out, he met their gaze head on. If you want to challenge me, fine, he said evenly. But ask yourself why you're doing it. Is it to prove something? To feel powerful? Because real strength doesn't come from picking fights, it comes from lifting others up. The older boys exchanged confused glances, clearly thrown off by his response. After a long pause, one of them muttered, "Whatever," before turning and walking away. The other followed suit, leaving the boy standing alone. As he watched them leave, he felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. Once again, he'd managed to defuse a situation without resorting to violence, just as Norris had taught him. As the school year drew to a close, the boy noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere around him. The playground, once a place where fear and tension lingered, now buzzed with laughter and chatter. Even the teachers seemed to notice the change, commenting on how much quieter the halls had become. It wasn't just about the absence of bullying. It was about the presence of something greater, a sense of community, of mutual respect. The boys' after-school sessions became a regular fixture, drawing kids of all ages and backgrounds. Some came to learn self-defense. Others simply wanted to belong to a group where everyone supported one another. Over time, the boy realized that what he was building wasn't just a club or a class. It was a safe space, a refuge for those who needed it most. One evening, as he sat on the front steps of his house reflecting on everything that had happened, his mom joined him. She smiled warmly, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. "You've grown so much this year," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." The boy looked at her, surprised. "Thanks, Mom, but I couldn't have done it without Mr. Norris. Everything I learned, from standing up to bullies to helping others, I owe to him." His mom nodded thoughtfully. "He gave you tools," she said, "but you're the one who decided how to use them, and I think you've done exactly what he would have wanted." The boy smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. For the first time, he truly understood what Norris had meant when he said, "Martial arts aren't just about fighting. They're about becoming the best version of yourself." Standing up to bullies, teaching younger kids, and staying true to his values, that was how he'd chosen to honor his mentor's legacy. As the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle overhead, the boy felt a deep sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges still lay ahead. But for now, he was content knowing that he'd made a difference, not just in his own life, but in the lives of others. And that, he realized, was the greatest victory of all. The last day of school arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and nostalgia. The air buzzed with energy as students cleaned out their lockers, exchanged phone numbers, and promised to stay in touch over the summer. For most kids, it was just another milestone, a chance to celebrate the end of exams and look forward to lazy days by the pool or family vacations. But for the boy, this day felt different. It wasn't just the close of a school year. It marked the end of a chapter he'd never forget. That morning, as he walked into the classroom, his classmates greeted him with smiles and high fives. Some even thanked him for everything he'd done. "You changed things around here," one of them said earnestly. "People don't mess with each other like they used to." The boy nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't set out to change anything. He'd simply wanted to protect himself and help others along the way. Yet somehow, without realizing it, he'd become a catalyst for something bigger. The playground that had once been filled with tension now echoed with laughter. Kids who had once been afraid to speak up now carried themselves with confidence. And while he knew there would always be challenges, bullying didn't disappear overnight. The shift was undeniable. As the final bell rang, signaling freedom from homework and early mornings, the boy lingered outside the school gates. A group of younger students gathered around him, eager to say goodbye before heading home. They hugged him tightly, promising to come back next year for more lessons. One little girl handed him a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said shyly before running off to join her friends. Curious, the boy unfolded the note. Inside was a simple drawing of stick figures practicing karate moves under a bright sun. Below it, written in messy but heartfelt handwriting, were the words, Thank you for teaching us how to be brave." His eyes stung as he stared at the picture. He tucked it carefully into his backpack, knowing it was something he'd treasure forever. Later that evening, as the boy sat on the couch flipping through old photos, his mom handed him an envelope. "This came in the mail today," she said with a knowing smile. He opened it cautiously, recognizing the familiar handwriting immediately. It was a letter from Chuck Norris himself. The boy's heart raced as he read the neatly typed words. "Dear friend, I heard about what you've accomplished recently, and I couldn't be prouder. You've taken the lessons we worked on together and applied them in ways I always hoped you would. Remember, true strength isn't measured by how many fights you win. It's measured by how much good you bring into the world. Keep inspiring others, keep standing tall, and never stop believing in yourself. You're proof that one person can make a difference. P.S. If you're free this summer, I'd love to see you at the ranch again. We've got plenty more to work on." The boy read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into his heart. It wasn't just praise, it was validation. All those summers spent training under Norris's guidance hadn't been about mastering punches or kicks. They'd been about shaping the kind of person he wanted to become. And now, thanks to his mentor's belief in him, he finally understood why he'd been given such a gift. A few weeks later, the boy packed his bags and boarded a bus headed for Texas. When he arrived at Norris's ranch, the familiar sight of rolling hills and wooden fences filled him with warmth. Norris greeted him with a firm handshake and a proud grin. "Welcome back," he said. "I hear you've been busy." The boy chuckled nervously. "Yeah, you could say that." Over the next few weeks, Norris pushed him harder than ever before, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. They practiced advanced techniques, meditated under the stars, and talked late into the night about life, leadership, and responsibility. Norris reminded him often that martial arts weren't just tools for self-defense. They were instruments of peace. "Every move you learn should serve a purpose," Norris told him, "and that purpose is to protect, inspire, and uplift." One afternoon, as they sparred under the blazing sun, Norris paused mid-session and looked the boy straight in the eye. "You've grown so much since I first met you," he said. "But remember, growth doesn't stop here. There will always be new challenges, new opportunities to prove yourself. What matters is how you choose to face them." The boy nodded, breathing heavily but determined. He knew Norris was right. Standing up to bullies and helping others had taught him a lot, but it was only the beginning. Life was full of moments where courage would be tested, where kindness might feel risky, and where doing the right thing wouldn't always be easy. But he was ready. Or at least, he was learning to be. When the summer ended and the boy returned to Oak Ridge, he brought back more than just improved skills. He carried a renewed sense of purpose, a mission to continue spreading the values Norris had instilled in him. He started volunteering at the local community center, leading weekly self-defense classes for kids of all ages. Parents began attending too, curious to learn alongside their children. Together they practiced not just punches and blocks, but lessons about respect, discipline, and empathy. Word spread quickly, and soon the classes became a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Even teachers and school administrators took notice, inviting the boy to speak at assemblies about bullying prevention and conflict resolution. Each time he stood in front of a crowd, sharing his story and offering advice, he thought about Norris's words. One person can make a difference. Maybe he couldn't fix every problem in the world, but he could plant seeds of hope and let others watch them grow. Years passed, and the boy grew into a young man. Though he eventually moved away to pursue his dreams, he never forgot where he came from or the lessons that had shaped him. Every summer he returned to Oak Ridge to teach at the community center, keeping the spirit of Norris's teachings alive. Kids who had once been scared or unsure blossomed into confident leaders inspired by his example. One evening, as he sat on the porch of his childhood home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on how far he'd come. From a quiet kid trying to fit into someone others looked up to, His journey had been anything but ordinary, but none of it would have been possible without the people who believed in him, his mom, his mentors, and especially Chuck Norris. He smiled softly, gazing out at the familiar streets of Oak Ridge. The town wasn't perfect and neither was he, but together they were building something meaningful, a place where courage and kindness went hand in hand. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he vowed to keep passing that legacy forward, one lesson, one moment, one person at a time.